What makes a great English teacher? I talked to Martin Johnston. He's the host of a podcast called Rock and Roll English. It's a podcast that's aimed at English learners who are at an intermediate level or above, but it actually does something really great. It makes learning a language fun and entertaining. So, for example, when you're learning a new language, do you ever have in your own language the types of conversations you read about in language books? Like, is this how you actually order a meal? Or is this how you actually ask for the bus stop? Or do these conversations even matter to you all that much? Not really, no. Rock and Roll English is stories about his life. It's about things like moving to a new country or starting a new family or making friends in a new country, that sort of thing. So it's entertaining, and he's got listeners who have been listening to every episode of his for years now. And I think I know why that is. It's because they get to peer into his life and learn about Martin as a person, and that's always more entertaining than just boring conversations we read about in language books. So I love this conversation with Martin. I learned so much about being entertaining and actually knowing what motivates people to learn a new language. Check it out. So, Martin, let's just start off with that. What is Rock and Roll English?
So, Rock and Roll English is a podcast for intermediate learners of English and above. And let's say I try to make it a very entertaining podcast, because I always remember when I was working in London, actually, and I was taking the train to and from work, and I actually hated my job at the time. I was working in banking, but that's another story. And I always wanted to be entertained when I was coming back from work. And I'm a language learner myself. I speak Italian very well, but you never stop learning. So I'm still learning now. And I've listened to so many Italian podcasts, and I just find them so boring. And I always thought, why don't people just have like basic conversations that you would have with friends in a pub? And that's basically what Rock and Roll English is, where I just talk to lifelong friends, actually. Some people that I have been friends with for more than 30 years, and we just talk about fun things. And stories is another big thing of the podcast. Lots and lots of stories get shared. And then I always think it helps you remember the vocabulary as well, because you learn it in context and you associate it with that story. So yes, that's what Rock and Roll English essentially is, a podcast for English learners, entertaining podcasts based around stories.
That's really interesting. What do you think the big value that your listeners get? They're learning English while being entertained?
So I would say that's the big value, but also hearing real friends talking to each other and having a good laugh, just like you do in the pub. I often explain it like you're a fly on the wall kind of thing, as to two friends having a conversation, because so many things, especially kind of textbooks and stuff, like for students, they're not real conversations because they're actors reading a scripted conversation. So you also don't get the stuff of when people change idea, and like natural speech is just a big mess, basically. And the textbooks, you definitely don't get those big messes. So yeah, the value I would say is the entertainment and the stories, because some of the things we talk about, are definitely not things that you would hear about in textbooks. So to give you an example of one story, one time when I was at my wife's family house, I realized I had no underwear and had to then wear my wife's underwear. So these kind of things that no one would ever really talk about. And then we just have a good laugh about these stupid things that happen to all of us. All of these stupid things happen to all of us on a regular basis. And I actually think it brings you closer to someone, because if someone shares an embarrassing experience with you, and maybe they show you that they felt vulnerable or stupid, you immediately feel a connection towards that person. If I tell you I'm rich and I have a Ferrari and I have the most beautiful wife in the world, you will think the complete opposite. There'll be no connection there, because you'll think I'm an idiot. But when people share these embarrassing stories, then I think you make a real connection with them. And furthermore, on a podcast, I think you make an even closer connection, because when you listen to a podcast, it's you, headphones, and the speakers. So I listen to a lot of podcasts myself. And I feel like I really know these people. I've never met them in my life, but I feel I do because I've listened to them for so long. And it's like an intimate kind of experience. And that's definitely what I get. People always saying to me, they feel like they know me. So I think that's a big value as well. Like you feel like you are part of the conversation and part of the group, let's say.
So do you get emails or messages from people like listeners of your podcast who are, is it primarily people trying to learn English?
Yeah, only people trying to
Only
learn
people.
English,
And
really.
what do they do? So they tell you that, wow, this has been one of the most entertaining but also useful things for me.
Yeah, I've literally had hundreds and hundreds of messages of how people, for example, needed a higher IELTS score, but they needed that exposure to the language. And the problem was, because the biggest thing in language learning is always motivation. Motivation, though, not I'm motivated to learn English or whatever, motivation to pick up that book, to listen to that podcast, to watch that film. So when you do something you actually like, then motivation is much higher. If you say to someone, read this book about philosophy, and they're not interested in philosophy, the chances of them finishing that book are very low. So I've had people send me a message saying, I found your podcast, I listened to all 250 episodes, and my listening skills like went through the roof, and I was able to improve my IELTS score and get what I needed. I get messages from people saying, yeah, how they feel like they know me, how they burst out laughing on the train on the way home in front of everyone. Yeah, anything and everything you can imagine.
So they increase their like listening ability, you said, but what else do they learn? Are there takeaways after every lesson? Like, do you use idioms perhaps and then explain what they are after the lesson, like that sort of thing?
Yeah, so
Or
during the
episode rather, not
podcast,
lesson. I'm sorry.
yeah, you can call it a lesson. It would be a very bit of a strange lesson, but
Right.
so, well, in fact, a podcast, the way it works is I will do a quick intro, then I would have a conversation with one of my friends, and the vocab comes out naturally. For example, if we don't have a script, I know a Word document with 5 or 6 bullet points on, and we just talk about those topics, and then whatever comes out. And then when I actually call it rock and roll vocabulary and rock and roll grammar, when any of that is used, I normally highlight it quickly at that point. Normally it's my friends, because they don't understand anything about teaching English. They have normal jobs, they work in banks and whatever, and they use the vocabulary, or sometimes I do. I quickly explain it, and then at the end of the conversation, there's like another part of just me speaking where I go through the vocabulary. Then all of the vocabulary and grammar is on the show notes, so then after people listen, they can go and find it there.
So there are like key takeaways from every episode.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, there's lots of, so mainly things like this: idioms, phrasal verbs, like expressions, collocations. These things are the things that I highlight.
And like self-motivated people who listen to your podcast then are like the primary audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the podcast has been going now since January 2017, and I still have a lot of people that have been there since day one. And I still sometimes get messages now of people that find an episode somewhere and they go back. And it's really weird because we talk about everyday stuff. It's like they're going back in time with my life, because my life has changed so much in these 5 years. And people send me a message saying like, oh, I've just found out the bit where you're just about to get married, kind of thing. And I think, yeah, okay, they get married, and then I have a daughter now. So it's weird. They go back in time with my life, let's say, when that happens.
Yeah. Everyone's a voyeur kind of at heart.
Yeah,
We love getting an inside look at other people's lives.
absolutely. And that very much is what, I mean, I'd share everything basically from my life, because again, that's what people talk about, isn't it? So if you go out with your friends, or if you're in an English speaking, so if you come to England for work or something like that, and you go out after work with a colleague, you talk about your lives, you talk about what's going on, just normal things. Not everything needs to be about art galleries and the history of Britain. Like that's a really common thing, isn't it? When you learn languages, they tell you the history of the country,
Yeah.
but which is interesting. I'm not saying it's not, but it's just not probably what you talk about so often with your friends. For example, when I meet up with my friends, it's very rare we talk about Queen Victoria and other things that happened in British history.
The Pax Britannica.
Yeah, it's not so often we talk about those things.
No.
We just generally talk about everyday kind of things, and that's what the podcast is.
Do any reader messages stand out to you? Anyone in particular? You mentioned a couple, but which ones would you say were some of the most impactful?
I've off the top of my head, it's quite difficult. I've got some on my Instagram actually, where someone from Argentina sent me one saying the specific words where you may not realize it, but you're having a big impact on a lot of people's lives here in Argentina. Argentina. I'm from England. Argentina's seems it's like another world almost. I would love to go to Argentina. Unfortunately, I've never been to South America, but so just getting messages like that. What other ones off the top of my head can I think of? When people talk about moving to countries and IELTS scores, that's always fantastic as well. In fact, I was actually thinking I think I should go back and actually print these, because I obviously love getting them, but I would like to have them all in one place, because obviously they're scattered around everywhere.
You should.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should. It'll give you a boost in certain moments. Where would you say most of your listeners come from?
So at the beginning, so I was living in Italy. I've only very recently moved back to the UK, which is where I'm originally from. But so I was living in Sicily. And so for the first 6 months at least, basically the only listeners were my students that I was giving it to them for homework. So that helped in Italy to build a following. And then some people told other people. So Italy is one of the biggest countries. Russia is another one. Poland is another one. I would say those are the three biggest where downloads come from: Italy, Russia, and Poland. And then all around the world, really. In Brazil and Argentina, there's quite a few. Also in Japan, China, quite a few. Yeah, Spain, and these types of countries. Yeah.
That's great, man. You said you've been doing this for 5 years?
Yeah, which is strange, because for me, I still feel like I'm new to this online thing. And when I talk to other podcasters or people that have YouTube channels, lots of them say I've been doing this 2 years or like maximum 3. I'm an oldie now in this online space, I think. But for me, I still learn things all the time. Everything's still new to me, really.
Well, I'm really curious. I have to listen to a few episodes. What's a good episode to start with?
What's a good episode to start with? I would say we did one recently. I think it was called Moving to Another Country, with one of my friends. It's probably about 5 or 6 episodes ago, more or less. And we shared quite a lot of funny stories there, because we were talking about me moving back to the UK. And my friend, who I have known since I was 4 years old, he was in the process of moving from France to Denmark. So we had a good laugh about our experiences in a foreign country and moving country. So I would say that's a good one to start with. It's a recent one, so there was about 250 before it, but yeah, just to get a feel for what's going on, I would say it's a good one.
Is it hard to come up with new ideas for episodes?
It is. It's just sometimes I'll be totally stuck. Sometimes it will just come to me within a second. Like I said, I have to do what's happening in my life. I'm not able to just pick random topics. So, for example, the most recent podcast that came out on Monday was about haircuts, because I recently got a haircut, and that experience, you go to the hairdresser and they start washing your hair and they say, is the water warm enough? And then they show you that mirror behind the back of your head, and you can't say anything except, yes, it's fantastic. So we spoke about the whole experience of going to the hairdressers, for example, because I think I need a topic, what's happened to me recently. And I actually stole this from another podcaster who's, I would say, the most famous in the podcast industry, which is Luke's English Podcast. And I text myself a lot. So things happen and I send myself a message just so I've got a record of it. And so, like, things to talk about, like strange experiences. Yeah. Like at the hairdressers, I was in the hairdressers texting myself constantly.
Where do you see this whole thing going? Do you think that it's going to look totally different in 5 years, or do you not think about it? What do you suspect?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I certainly haven't got such a clear plan, that's for sure.
Right.
Because the whole thing started just as a bit of fun, just because I thought I love podcasts, and I thought I would love to, exactly as I described earlier, give something entertaining for people to listen to. So just a bit of fun. That's how it started. So it has changed a lot since. Now I have, for example, a community of people that pay for extra content, and then we like meet up online like once a week, and I make videos for them. I've run some other courses, but so yeah, there are lots of different possibilities, but the main thing, to try and just keep making content which people find valuable and helping people, because that's really where you get the big buzz. When I get those messages, as I briefly mentioned, I worked in banking before and I never really felt like I was making a difference in the world at all. So now this was another reason of doing the podcast, to actually help people. The thing I like about it the most is there's a kind of legacy there. I actually said to my wife recently, our daughter is very young, she's 1 and 2 months. If I were to die tomorrow, she could literally go and listen to all of those episodes and then would know me more or less, like all of the listeners. But hopefully I won't die tomorrow. But in answer to your question, where is it going? Yeah, I just obviously want to keep growing it and see where it goes.
That's such an interesting answer, because so many people think, especially when you get to a certain age or when you have children, what am I going to leave them after I die? And everybody always thinks, I should probably write a book of my life, or that's my legacy. But why not just create a podcast?
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, just in case anyone's ever thinking about it, they are actually really easy to make. And if an idiot like me can make one, then believe me, it's really not difficult. Just before, Harry and I were talking about some online stuff, and he mentioned some cameras, and I was a bit like, oh God, I don't really understand what he's talking about, because I'm not very good with technology at all. But making a podcast is actually quite simple. And that's also why I probably haven't ventured far into YouTube, because the work involved, I don't really understand the cameras and editing videos. But editing audio is really simple. You need a microphone, a computer, and you're away.
Be sure you hit record, that's all.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah. And YouTube, even, I'm not a YouTuber, but it's so interesting. I made a few videos several years ago trying to teach myself how to code. And I just recorded my screen as I was like explaining how to solve specific coding problems. And they got like tens of thousands of hits.
Oh, wow.
No production value, no, fancy video cameras, just me recording my screen and talking into a cheap microphone. And people still to this day, I get emails saying, this is so helpful, this is so useful, thank you so much for saying. I was like, geez. So YouTube will surprise.
Okay, wow. Yeah, if you can do something like that, yeah, of course. But yeah, I'm the video editing, when people do the transitions, like for me,
I suspect that your podcast is popular because it's useful,
Hmm.
not because you have
Yeah.
high production value, not because you spent $10,000 on a microphone or something like
Hmm.
that, but people find it useful.
Absolutely. I've actually thought someone actually sent me, a listener got in contact and said, I think you should start growing your YouTube channel. Because I have one. I think I've got like nearly 1,000 subscribers, funnily enough. I've only got about 5 videos on there and they're all terrible. And he actually said you can even just put a picture of the logo and then just play the podcast, because he said people like listening to
Right.
podcasts like on the computer when they're at work, when they should be
Yeah.
working and they're not.
Yeah. It could be a separate
Um,
distribution channel.
yeah. So I might venture into it, but there certainly won't be any high class videos. I can assure people of that.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be. So I'm talking to you as a teacher, and I teach children, but I teach adults. I teach all kinds. And it sounds like there's a lot that teachers could learn from the impact you've made and like the amount that people have been able to learn from listening to your podcast. And so you talk about it's all conversational. We don't talk about where to find the bus stop or what was the history of Britain. We talk about things that real people talk about. And you learned when you were learning Italian, for example. I'm not sure if you picked that up, like when you actually learned that language, but was that something you were frustrated with as a student? That none of the lessons actually mirrored real world situations or allowed me to be like a normal human being in my conversations?
Yeah. So when like at the beginning, let's say, I tried a few language classes and I really didn't get on very well with them for that exact reason. And I really didn't enjoy them. In fact, like the role play thing, I never really liked. So as a teacher, when I do either online classes or in the past when I was working face to face, especially with adults, with children, like they often got really into it and loved it. But with adults, I often found, and I myself as an adult didn't enjoy that. So yeah, I tried to avoid those things. And yeah, that's maybe another reason why I branched off and went solo, because I was working for a language school and there was a specific curriculum to follow. And sometimes I was doing a lesson thinking, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Because this is, I personally think this is a waste of time, but it's in the test. So they need to do this because they need to do well on the test, because if they don't, that will reflect badly upon me as a teacher. And yeah, lose track of the whole reason you get into teaching when you're doing things like that. So that was another reason why I decided to go solo, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the incentives are off in that arrangement.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, when I went to a few Italian classes and they said, okay, so like pretend you're in a restaurant, like you're the waiter, you're ordering food. Like I just didn't get on very well with it at all, to be honest. And again, motivation levels at that point, which we spoke about earlier, really low. And then that was demonstrated by the fact I didn't go back and I didn't continue with the lessons because motivation levels were low. And once you've lost, that's it. So I read, so to learn or to improve a language, you need 3 things, which are exposure to the language, so reading and listening, using the language, so writing and speaking, and motivation. And obviously the most important is motivation, because without that, you've got nothing.
Yeah. You mentioned like the origin of rock and roll English, but how much of that experience learning Italian played a role in starting rock and roll English? Like, I wish language learning was more like.
So certainly the part of when I was trying to find Italian podcasts to listen to, that's probably where the idea came from, to be honest, because like I said, I love podcasts anyway. So I listen to podcasts about various different things. Being British, we love football here, which maybe for you is soccer. But so I listened to lots of them and about various different things. So that once I started learning Italian, it just seemed the natural step to find some Italian podcasts. I just found them so boring. And then I thought, so I kept looking for something more entertaining. And then I thought, I'm sure there are other people like me that are learning English. Maybe I can make one of them. And that's basically what I started doing. I was teaching English at the time anyway. So yeah, it all just fell into place, let's say.
I see. Yeah. As someone who came from the Korean after school industry, because I taught English in South Korea for 2 years,
Right.
but I taught children, and they would always give us this impossible curriculum at the schools you worked for, and they never told you how to actually roll it out, but they always told you to do one thing: make it fun.
Right.
Like,
Of course.
how am I supposed to make this fun? And you're supposed to make it fun because they're kids, and kids can't learn unless you make it fun.
Yeah.
So it was hard, but at least you learned, like you actually developed that ability to get through to people by creating an entertaining environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly with kids, I used to enjoy teaching kids. And then lots of games in the classrooms, competitions, and seeing them getting really involved. Yeah, was fantastic. That's maybe one thing I miss, because now I don't really teach any children, and like having those big groups sometimes, because you sometimes do quite a lot with a group. So yeah, that's maybe one thing I miss.
Yeah. I teach all one-on-one. I have some group classes, but group classes are tough when you teach virtually. And
Certainly for kids,
for
because
kids,
again, I have done that. So at the start of the pandemic, and then yeah, it's difficult to keep them on task, let's say.
really, yeah, very much. What's great about a virtual classroom is that my kids are at home, so they feel safe and comfortable, and they can goof off because
Yeah,
as
yeah,
long as they have to speak to me at least, and as long as they're speaking the language, they can goof off or make jokes, and it's
sure,
all part of the learning process.
absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome, Martin. This is probably wraps up my questions for you and for Rock and Roll English. Did you have any closing thoughts?
Any closing thoughts?
Anything you'd like to
Uh,
add?
Anything I would like to add? Oh, actually, maybe I can actually try and plug something here, because we recently, the community, which is called the Rock and Roll English family, because it really does feel like it is almost just like an extension of my family, like the members, because we have such a close relationship. And one of the members is from Ukraine, and he's now had to send his his wife and daughter away, and we wrote an ebook, and all the money is going to Ukraine. And we've already donated $1,000, and we're still collecting money. So yeah, people can check that out if they go to rockandrollenglish.com/stories. And because, like I mentioned to you before, how the podcast is based around stories, and all of these stories are written by people in the community. So from all around the world. I didn't write them. I just edited them, made sure the English was correct. And we've got some brilliant stories in there. And exactly what I mentioned before. So I think actually it's written on the front cover how we said real life stories create community because they remind us how our lives are more similar than they are different. Because when you read that and you think, oh, God, someone from Argentina fell over down the street as well and felt really embarrassed. That's happened to me. So that's the kind of idea behind it, and all of the money's going to a good cause.
So people can go to rockandrollenglish.com/stories.
Yes.
Okay. And they can buy this ebook, and all the proceeds go to, is it a specific charity in Ukraine, or what is it?
Yes, you can find them on Instagram, and I think their website is gracet.org. So grace, like the name, tea, like a cup of tea, gracet.org, and they're fantastic. 100% of the money that goes to them goes to helping people. Everyone is a volunteer. There is no, some charities, for example, like the directors get paid like salaries, which are crazy. So all of it goes there. They even sent us some pictures of where the money's actually gone. So yeah, it's really fantastic organization.
That's wonderful. All right. I apologize for the notification bells that just went off, but
That's okay.
as you were describing that, my apologies. But that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
No problem. Thanks a lot for having me on and asking me these questions.
This was great, Martin. I love this. This is a fun conversation.
Also for me. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. So here are some takeaways I had from my conversation with Martin. The first is that learning a language should be an immersive experience. The truth is, we learn more things through stories and through experiences. When we put a story or an experience around something, we retain that information better, we remember it more often, we experience it more deeply. This is why specific types of marketing is so effective, because they put a memorable story around it. So Martin is always having conversations about his life, and he's sharing funny experiences. So people who are trying to learn English by listening to his podcast actually learn more, because they can tie the things that they're learning around an experience, around a specific situation, and it's immersive. I think that's really interesting. Next is, I think it's amazing how Martin kind of created an almost addictive way to learn a new language. For example, he told me that he has listeners who contact him and they tell him that they listened to all 250 plus episodes of his podcast going back 5 years. I mean, why do you think that is? I think I know why. I think that's because they get to have an inside look at Martin's life. I mentioned at one point in the interview, it's like we're all a voyeur to some extent. We love peering into other people's lives and experiences. And Martin's very open about what he does and the things that he is experiencing all the time. So that's really interesting to me. It creates a more addictive way to learn English. Now, Martin's also an English teacher, which I'm an English teacher, but talking to him as a podcast host, I learned a lot because it taught me a lot about incentives, right? And early on, especially early on when I was a teacher, I got caught in this trap where I'm teaching my students with the hopes that they're gonna score a certain thing on a test, you know? And if you're only learning something so that you can get a score on a test, and that really reflects better on me than it does on you. It shows that, hey, my students got these scores, and that means I'm a good teacher because of that number, whatever it is. But Martin was able to share his frustrations as a student who was trying to learn Italian, right? He got so bored with all the stupid conversations we read about, or just boring conversations we read about in these language learning books, and he wanted something that was more interesting and more also true to life. And so it made me realize that as a teacher, I got to be more aligned with my incentives. My incentives have to be more aligned with my students, because my goal at the end of the day is to help them learn and help them achieve their goals. Something else Martin shared with me was that you need 3 things to learn a new language. You need exposure to the language, so that's reading and listening. You need to use the language. And third, you need motivation. But that third one is the most important, because without motivation, you're not going to stick with it. So the addicting, entertaining aspect of listening to Rock and Roll English is geared towards helping people keep up that motivation for learning a new language. And last, Martin got started with Rock and Roll English because he was frustrated with something in his own life. Learning Italian was boring. The classes were boring, the teachers were boring, the books were boring. So he thought to himself, people are probably bored and frustrated trying to learn my language. And so he created Rock and Roll English to try to make a more entertaining and motivating way to learn his language. So always be looking for things that you're frustrated with and try to find solutions to those problems so you can help other people. And last, to purchase Martin's ebook, go to www.rockandrollenglish.com/stories. All the proceeds will go to gracet.org. The link is also in the description. That is a charity that is set up to help the people of Ukraine. All right, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. My name's Harry. I'm from Harry's English Academy. Thank you.